Check it out. Just go ahead and pick them up. Let me know when you got that.
This was recognized in the Greek military. We're talking something that's been known about for over 2,000 years. It's not a new problem. We actually, post the First World War, actually started to get some of this right, and then we forgot. And that is one of the problems with militaries and conflict, is we continuously relearn the lessons from the previous conflicts, because the people involved in it have changed. So in terms of Anzac Day and mental injury, yep, it's around. It's common to all the generations. The rates change slightly, but we've all got the same problems. In terms of recognizing it, it does play out differently in different generations, partly because of what you get exposed to, partly because of the coping skills that come with the different generations. Contemporary generation talks more and acts out more. My father's generation, very stoic. But it is still the same problem. So in terms of recognizing people, it's, if you think it might be, it probably is, and it's worth doing the screening. There is a trend in society towards victimhood, and in some groups there is a tendency towards a kind of compensation mentality. But my experience of it, both 20 years with the military and subsequently, and I work with Veterans Affairs at the moment, is the rates of those who are malingering or compensation seeking is actually incredibly small. I actually tend to find most veterans underplay what they've got rather than overplay it, which is quite a different dynamic to what's happening in the rest of society at the moment. Now that's quite different to some countries where your compensation is tied to your diagnosis. So that then becomes a problem because you've got to get the diagnosis before you can get the help. I actually think that's a really detrimental way to do things because it leads to two problems. One is the delay in getting to the help in the first place because you've got to get the diagnosis first. The second one is that whole mentality then of I've got to collect diagnoses, collect the points to get more. And you can definitely see that pattern in some groupings. It's not a common pattern in New Zealand, partly because our way of compensating this is quite different. When the problems start, you start by trying to adapt yourself. So, for instance, in my case, when the nightmares came, I couldn't sleep, I started drinking. Now, a nip before bed, sleep quite well. 2 nips before bed, sleeping okay. Bottle before bed, still not sleeping okay. Okay, I've got a problem now. The underlying mechanism is the same, but it's how we adapt to it and the risk that it brings as a result. And some of that is the conditioning we get with service. To take a statistic from where in the Second World War, Vietnam, only 1 in 5 soldiers would shoot to kill, to something like the modern conflicts where we know 4 out of 5 or better will shoot to kill. To do that in the training, we have to change a couple of things. We have to change the threshold for violence, and we have to change that soldier's ability to believe in that greater good, that what they're doing in terms of the mission transcends the moral obligation not to kill. Now the problem when I get out and I then start to run into problem in terms of, let's say for instance PTSD or moral injury, is that change in the threshold for violence, that change in understanding violence as a tool hasn't gone away. And that's why the rates of domestic violence, the rates of interpersonal violence, be it verbal or physical, in those with these problems can be higher because we've changed that threshold. And it's the go-to place. But that bit that I was talking about that problem with the regulation, the bit that takes me from here to here as a civilian in terms of just getting to that threshold where I'm going to get violent, that takes a long time and a lot of push to get there. As a military veteran, the training allows me to go from there to there. There's no ramp up. Then if you've dysregulated it because of the injury, you'll go from there to there before realizing it's happening. It's that difference between the civilian context of violence and violence as an emotional outcome versus the military context of violence, which is violence as a tool. And violence in the military construct is overwhelming violence because that achieves the outcome.
We've got at least 5 or 6 down here. Got one killed already. So.